Welcome to Leadership Rediscovered. I'm your host, Laura Siebold, and today I am very honored to be joined by Dr. David Hess, who is the new president and CEO of WVU Medicine United Hospital Center. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, Laura. It's an honor and a pleasure. I've seen your video podcast in the past, and I'm very excited to be on.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to go through your formal bio here.
Yes, please.
And then we have so much great material to talk about, so I'm excited to dive in.
Me too.
Thank you. Dr. David Hess has been a lifelong West Virginian. Aside from 4 years he spent in residency at the University of Kentucky in Lexington. He was born in the southern part of West Virginia and spent the majority of his life in Lumberport, West Virginia, being raised by an RN and a long-term loyal employee of United Hospital Center. He went to undergraduate and medical school at WVU, Mountaineers, and returned to Glen Dale, West Virginia after doing a combined residency in internal medicine and pediatrics. He opened a private primary care practice and quickly grew it to the largest primary care practice in the Ohio Valley with 5 employed providers. He practiced as a hospitalist at Reynolds Memorial Hospital for many years and ascended through the leadership ranks at the hospital. He was selected as CEO in December of 2014 and has overseen financial turnarounds at 3 WVU Medicine Hospitals through growth, physician recruitment, and improvement in quality of care. Dr. Hess has very recently transitioned from his role as president and CEO of WVU Medicine Uniontown Hospital to his new role as president and CEO of WVU Medicine United Health Center in Bridgeport, West Virginia. David is married to his wife, Nicole, and is the father of 5 daughters and 1 son, ages 3 to 17. He is active in his church as well as helping coach most of his children's athletic teams. In his outside time of work, he enjoys music, the outdoors, and all of sports. And over the course of 7 years, he helped to raise over $250,000 in his band, Albuterol and the Inhalers. Love that. A band made up of healthcare professionals in the region. He has made it his mission to give back and reinvest in the state that gave him so much growing up. I would also like to mention that David is an alum of Lincoln High School. Go Cougars!
As many of our great West Virginians are.
Yes, absolutely. So again, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
I got to tell you, you're a singer, you're an interdisciplinary athletic coach, you're a business leader, and not to mention also a physician.
Yeah.
So quite a background. And I would just love for you to take us on your leadership journey.
Yeah, and I appreciate the opportunity to come on. You know, I think the bios are always very embarrassing. And but I think the reason that I wanted to make sure that the bio read that way was because at least when I grew up, you think about leaders and you think about entrepreneurs and you think about CEOs, right? And there's this perception in your mind when you're growing up in a small town in West Virginia,
Yes.
that's something that, you know, in our area, we would say, well, somebody in Pittsburgh would be that person, or somebody in Columbus, Ohio, or somebody in New York City, right? They don't think of a kid who grew up in a double-wide trailer in Lumberport, a town of 1,000 people, could grow up and become a fairly successful leader, which hopefully I've been able to do that. And you know, when I go back and talk to some of the schools that I went to, the message in the bio is not a brag fest or a humble brag. The message in the bio is, listen, if I can do it, anybody can, right? I didn't come up with a ward cleaver kind of family. You know, my parents were divorced. My mother raised me. And basically as a solo parent, she was a registered nurse at United Hospital Center for many years, is truly my hero. But the reason for the bio is that, you know, I didn't come up with, you know, my dad was the CEO or my dad owned a company or, you know, my mother's family had money, you know, so there's not a stereotypical way to get into leadership. And certainly if I can do it, anybody can do it because, you know, I didn't grow up with everything being perfect and all the opportunities afforded to me.
To you.
Correct.
Silver platter.
Correct. So the message through the bio really was about, you know, the opportunities are there for anybody, whether your family has connections or can open doors or network for you or not. Because really I had to knock on a lot of the doors myself, and it was just through the grind that we always talk about in business and leadership that I just kind of out hustled a lot of people. And that's just the part of, I think, the beauty of what true West Virginians are all about is that we just kind of work hard. We put our heads down and grind, and we come up and look around and see what we've accomplished, and then we go back down again. But truly had a great upbringing, and always had that tug to leadership, whether it was through things throughout school, opportunities through school, whether it was student council or student body president, those kind of things. And I was president of my medical school class, and I've just always been drawn to leadership, and any opportunity that I could get to improve myself and take classes or courses to be a better leader, I did it. I think that some people are born with a little bit of that ability to influence people, and people are drawn to them and look to them for some leadership. And so for those reasons, you kind of have that nudge from other people, like, hey, you should do this, you should do this. But also there's that internal motivation that I felt like I've always had to try to do more and affect more and influence more. And really it's about giving back to the state that was amazing for me growing up. The area was, if I didn't have enough money at the store, somebody would pay for it and see my mom the next day and get the money from her. And I was blessed with so many loving and caring and compassionate people around me that now I just want to give back to those folks who did such an amazing job with me growing up.
It's amazing. And as a Harrison County resident, I am very excited about you coming back to Harrison County. And I want to dive into that in a minute here. But I need you to fact check me. I read an article, which I think this is your statement, so check me here on this. But it said, I started my undergraduate work as an economics major. However, once in college, I began to miss science. I wanted to understand the shy. Did you write that? Does that sound familiar?
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
I'm curious about what you meant by I wanted to understand the shy, and if you could walk through, because you do have a really interesting educational background too, with the combination of the business and the science. So I would just love for you to share a little bit more on that, if you don't mind.
So, again, another message for folks, and again, I've got teenage daughters, and they always look to me and say, how do you know what you wanted to do? It's so hard for people to pick what they want to do in a career. And obviously, just like many of your other guests have said, you can be a leader no matter what you do.
Absolutely.
But, for career choices, some of us have kids, some of us have friends that they want your advice. How did you get to where you are? What should I tell my daughters to do? And really the message from my background is, a lot of times you don't know when you start college or when you start first in that career. And my background in education is really about the pivot. And I know a lot of your leaders have been able to do it in their businesses, where a lot of entrepreneurs have to do it in their business. Sometimes you got to pivot. And if it doesn't feel right in here, you got to make the pivot. So, what was missing was, so I started out in business. I loved economics and business and the leadership of that. But really it was missing that, it was missing the scientific process and the analysis and making A plus B equals C and watching the kind of the reaction and the science behind that. So I was missing that portion of the intellectual side of science. But also the people that you're around as well. So when I started doing a little more science classes, really we all go through this, our emotional garbage bags are more full and more empty, and you go through ups and downs, and sometimes you have to surround yourself with people that motivate you and push you, whether that's through competitiveness or they inspire you to do better or wow, that person, really came from a different background. And if they're able to succeed in chemistry or organic chemistry, I should be able to do that.
Yeah.
So, surrounding yourself with people that continue to motivate you and inspire you. And so I got into the science classes. I was like, wow, these are my people here. They're grinding hard. They're asking, they're questioning everything. And so I found myself gravitate towards that. But I also had this pull over here in economics to want to continue that. Mm-hmm. So I just decided, okay, I'm going to major in both. And I don't know if this is true. Maybe I could ask President Gee, but I may have been the only person to double major in chemistry and economics at WVU. Maybe there are other people out there that watch this
might be.
that would challenge me on that. But I can tell you that nobody that I knew was doing a double major in both. And
wow.
And it's so important because, the economics, the finance, the leadership piece, that touches every job and everything we do. And I was so blessed that I had the foresight back then to just continue all those classes and understand how this touches every part of my life personally, but also every part of any career and every job you take.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's interesting too, because I love that you didn't approach this situation or this decision as I have to do this or this. Mm-hmm. You really did a nice job of the and,
right.
Instead of the or. And I think that's such a good lesson for anyone, children, or even once people are in their careers, of you don't necessarily just have to abandon that one thing and move only into something else. You can find a way to continue to do both.
I love that. That's such a great lesson. And I think that, for many of us, they think it's just an absolute decision mm-hmm. of, black or white, mm-hmm. and there's no way to do both to make gray at the end.
Yeah.
And I think that I've done that through my whole life. In the bio, it mentions, my selection in my medical specialty.
Yeah.
And I remember that, it seemed like I loved both of my rotations going through medical school, to be able to take care of adults, to be able to take care of kids. And, I met a person in training that said, hey, I did both. There's a double residency in adults and kids. And I thought, wow, it was the light switch moment that I said, I can do both. Okay, I'm going to do both.
Yeah.
So it took me a year longer than if I'd have did each of them individually, but it was so worth it because it gave me that perspective of being able to take care of somebody truly from cradle to grave. Again, for this show, the message is, don't sell yourself short.
Right.
If there's a way to do both, if there's a way to encompass your passion in with what you feel like, would be more of my career, do them both. Weave both of them together so that at the end of the day, I'm incredibly happy because I didn't have any regrets and look back and say, boy, I wish I'd have kept economics up, or boy, I wish I'd have done chemistry, and I was scared because I couldn't think of doing both of them. So I did for my elective credits in chemistry were my economics classes. So I was able to work it out, but that is a great message, is to not sell yourself short and to just do as much as you can without giving up something.
Yeah. Well, and I think speaking of doing both, you can see in your career that you've maintained both of those, even from the very beginning with the business and the science. And you've actually started businesses over your career, including in-care physicians. Would you talk a little bit more about that and what that experience was like?
So a lot about leadership is solving problems, whether it's an entrepreneur who starts his own business and finds that there's a problem and they want to be the solution for. So in-care physicians, I would run into hospital CEOs or hospitals that say it's very, very difficult for us to recruit physicians to take care of people in the hospital and to staff it and to be able to talk to physicians because, again, physicians are made a little bit differently. And then just the schooling that we go through, when we come out the other side, we have a perspective that's different. We have a way to look at things that are different. So it is a little bit of a different conversation with physicians to get them to recruit and come on board with you. So, I offered a company that was kind of a start to finish solution for hospital CEOs to basically outsource that piece, to say, you know what, it's very difficult to recruit these physicians. It's very difficult to have these conversations with them because I'm a true administrator. I'm not clinical. I don't know what's important to them.
Language.
Correct. Yeah. So I opened InCare as a solution for those hospitals to say, okay, I get it. It's difficult. Throw it to me and I'll do it from start to finish. And honestly, that's the route that my career was heading. I saw a need for that. I saw more and more hospitals wanting that. And then truly you have that moment in your career where you have that decision point of, yes, I can be very successful depending on what you, call success.
Sure.
I can be successful going down this path. But in the end of 2014, as you mentioned, a hospital that was near and dear to me, that was my first hospital that I started working at. Their CEO did not get his contract renewed, and somebody asked me to throw my hat in the ring because they saw some of the success in my private practice. They saw the success in this hospitalist company, InCare Physicians, and they said, would you consider doing this? And then you looked at the 300 or 400 people that work for this small hospital, and you knew that you could do right by them, and you knew that they needed you in that time because they were financially struggling, and that was one where you put the Dave Hess career path, you set it aside and you say, time out, these people need me and I'm going to stop. And again, I think great lesson for leaders in their career is that, you can be climbing up the ladder as fast as you want to. Sometimes there's points where just to really for your purpose, you have to stop and you have to pause for a second and you have to either pull other people along or you have to wait for them to catch up with you. And I think that was a moment where I'm so glad that I did it because it opened up so many other opportunities in my life to really impact people and to truly lead people.
Yeah, well, but how interesting, because I think you were chasing after a need. You were on a path where you were trying to solve a problem, fix a need, and then someone came knocking on the door and said, oh, but there's this other need, this other problem here, and you had that probably very difficult decision.
Very difficult.
Did you end up just closing that business down? Or?
I did.
Okay.
I did.
That was a big change.
It was a huge change. And again, I was very proud of it. It was very successful. But in the end, I think the heartstrings got tugged on a little bit, and I felt like, when I laid my head down at night and was happy with the work I'd done that day, would it be just building something for the sake of building it and truly meeting a need for hospitals, or was it the community that I lived and served in West Virginia and their families that depended on their jobs at the hospital. And it was a difficult decision, but, looking back, sometimes when you feel something tugging on you, it's probably the right decision. So I think, at the end of the day, just knowing that I was able to help those people, in that hospital now, I've left it now, it's been about a year and a half. It is a thriving hospital. That's awesome. It has doubled in size in employee count. Very pleased that hospital, the average salary had increased by $6 or $7 an hour.
Wow.
Because again, as we grew and we became profitable, we reinvested in the people.
Yeah, that's amazing.
So, and then guess what? They caught fire. And they were like, wow, you get it. Okay, we're going to work harder for you. And guess what? Then we became more profitable.
Yeah.
And then we reinvested in the people again.
Yes.
And, again, it's leadership and it's just the business acumen of the first thing you always have to do is take care of your employees. And then good things will come of that. And it has. It's been, President Gee loves the story of WVU Medicine Reynolds because we took a small town hospital that was probably going to close without WVU Medicine coming in. And really, when WVU Medicine goes in, we reinvigorate a hospital, but we reinvigorate the community with it. So it's fun to do. It's fun to watch. And it truly goes back to when you reinvest in your people, they will take care of you.
Yeah. And, something that I have noticed, though, on the flip side of that, and I'd really like to hear your perspective on this, is oftentimes when an organization is struggling, they pull back
Yes.
on the investment. So, and you've been in organizations maybe that weren't,
Yes.
financially
Right.
viable for long. How did you approach that and balance that?
It's a
'Cause that's
very
hard.
tough balance. And again, your initial knee jerk is, you look at your home finances, right? When you start spending too much, you're like, oh, maybe I better not go out to eat
Right.
tonight. And you start pulling
Pull
back.
back.
Right. And so you really have to trust yourself. You have to trust your instincts. So for, it may be an oversimplification, but you can either cut your way out of financial problems or you can grow your way out of it. And I've always been a grower. I've always been a seize the opportunity. Is there a new market we can go into? Is there a new opportunity to grow market share in different places? Is there a new service line that we're not doing that we should be able to do because the community is wanting you to do that? So honestly, I trust my instinct. I saw that there was a need. That hospital was giving away a lot of business that we could have been keeping at the hospital because we had a very kind, compassionate group of people, and people were wanting to choose our hospital. But we weren't offering certain services. So we actually ended up growing service lines and growing into orthopedics, and we grew into cancer, and we grew into women's and children's services. But there were many nights where I was scared that did I do the right thing, And I know you've asked other folks on this show what keeps you up at night.
Yeah.
Boy, those were the decisions that kept me up at night. Should I have cut instead of growing out of problems? And I'm a very collaborative leader, so I took a lot of input from my senior leadership team. Right. What are you hearing out in the community? What are you hearing from the employees? And the employees had full trust in us because, again, the initial gains that we made, instead of building on new towers or painting somewhere, we invested back in the people.
That's
we
amazing.
said, look, you give us a little extra. We're going to put it right back into your salary, and we're going to give you better benefits. We're going to give you better health insurance. And I think for that reason, they ended up giving us more effort. And but it was so difficult because the knee jerk initially is, let's clench tighter, let's hold on to the checkbook a little bit, and it is tough.
And I see that so often. That does seem to be the default go-to
Absolutely.
option. But you can only cut so much.
Right.
At some point, to me, that's not a sustainable strategy.
You're absolutely right.
And I like to think about it as losing weight, right?
Right.
Calories in versus calories out.
Right.
I'd much rather just do more calories out,
right?
And eat what I want to, or
exactly.
Do a little more on that end, because you can only cut so much.
You're exactly right.
But that does seem to be that kind of default option. So I think that's a huge lesson to other leaders, other business owners out there, to say, wait a second, again, there's not only one option. You can figure out a way to invest in your people. And maybe it is a conversation about, hey, everyone, I think the fact that you are collaborative and that you were talking to people and I would assume probably pretty transparent about what was
very
going
transparent.
on. Yeah, being able to say, here's where we're at, here's where we're trying to go, need your help getting there, but oh, by the way, when we get there, there's something in it for you too.
Were you in on the meetings?
No.
Because that was the exact
Is that how you did it?
That was the exact message.
Oh, yeah.
The financials were never kind of an open book to the employees. We made them an open book. We walked them through the process and our logic. And, I tell everybody that starts with any of my businesses and companies that, congratulations, you're now part of the marketing team as well.
Yeah. Because
especially at hospitals, the first thing we do is we ask a nurse that works there, or we ask somebody who works in the operating room, who's the best surgeon at a hospital. So, when you are fully transparent and you let people know that, from this day forward, we're only hiring and recruiting A-player physicians and people that we would go to ourselves, so that when you go out into the community, you let everybody know that these are truly the best people that you can go to, but we want you to be our marketing folks. Again, I was very transparent in the timeline and what was going to happen when, but you say, look, we get to this point, we're going to reinvest in you again. When budget season comes up next year, we're going to put it right back into you, because again, you're going out and you're telling your friends, you need to see Dr. So-and-so. He's such a great physician. So again, you're absolutely right. It was being very transparent, and it was over communicating the situation. And that scared a lot of people. Quite honestly, it's, oh my gosh, are we going to lose people because we're going through financial issues? And
should we tell them that? They're going to get nervous.
Right. Yeah. How honest should we be? And again, I think always being honest is the right answer.
Yeah.
Because, the way you communicate it, and I think being an inspirational leader and being transparent at the same time, they can understand that we had full confidence in our plan, in our strategic plan and vision. And they could see that. And they say, okay, it's going to be tight for a while. We're going to count the paper clips for a while that we're using. And, but at the same time, I believe in you and I know we're going to get there. And I think that they appreciated the honesty.
Absolutely.
So that when people outside of the organization said, well, I heard you guys are going through some financial trouble. You want to come over and work for me? They say, no. They've been very honest that the next 6 months are going to be tough, but then we're going to start turning the corner. We've got all these new contracts coming on. And then when they started seeing those things happen, they said, wow, we have a leader who's very transparent and is very honest with us. And what they say they're going to do, they're doing. And what they say is going to happen is starting to happen. And then it really, everybody bought in then.
Right. And you followed through too,
Yeah,
which is
absolutely.
a huge part of that.
Yeah.
It wasn't just empty promises.
Right.
But I do think a lot of times why people leave when there is a financial difficulty or any kind of struggle in an organization is the fear of the unknown.
Right.
And if you can take some of that off the table and say, listen, we understand, that this is possibly concerning for you. Here's open the books.
Right.
And here's where it's, and you're also teaching people more about the business.
Absolutely.
And how to take more ownership over the business too.
No, it's a great opportunity to do that.
Yeah.
Because again, some of the conversations centered around, because everybody would ask, okay, are you cutting my part of the company? Are you cutting my division? And I say, look, the total corporation's losing money. We can't have all these lost leaders. Everybody said, well, I'm a lost leader. Well, you can't have too many lost. Yeah. Not everybody can be a lost leader. Somebody's got to be making money.
Yeah.
But, I took that opportunity to say, help me understand. Okay, let's say you're a lost leader. How can we minimize the subsidy?
Sure.
Okay, I get it. You're right. Maybe the emergency room or maybe a part of this company, it has to be a lost leader. I totally get it. But how can we minimize the amount of subsidy? Help me walk through what you're seeing as opportunities for us to save on expenses or grow a little bit more revenue within your division, not expecting you to turn a profit. Not everything can be a profit center. And sometimes there are loss leaders, but help me understand how to minimize the subsidy to your department. And they say, well, I'm glad you asked. Did you know that we're overpaying and doing this? And it did bring up some great conversations. And I had a contest early on. It was called the 3I Award, capital I. And it was ideas, innovations, and improvements. So,
ideas, innovations, improvements.
Yeah. So,
that.
What ideas do you have that haven't been acted on? And we'd have a little contest. What innovative thing could you recommend for the company, or what are we doing now that we could improve upon? And it really, more than anything, I wanted to be very transparent that I wasn't a leader who was going to come in and I've got all the answers and I don't need anybody else's help. I think, I always say, your department, you're on the front lines, it better than I do.
Sure.
So please help me understand how we can make it better. But I think it sent the message that, I'm not some omnipotent person that feels like they know it all and knows the answer for every question here. I think it engaged people and it got buy-in from them to say, wow, this guy gets it. I do know that, we could do this or that and change things and really make it better. So it was very engaging to the folks. And, and we had it written down and they would submit it to me and I would literally read them all. And I would say 50% of them started out with, I'm glad somebody finally asked.
Yes.
And you're like, geez, that just tells you enough right there that nobody's asking frontline staff, how can we make things better? And I think that's very important.
And they so often have the answers and they're just waiting. I think a lot of times leaders will say, well, if they had the answer, why didn't they just say something?
Right.
And they're waiting to be
Absolutely.
asked. And all they want is to be able to share. And even sometimes you can really rally people around a challenge, even if it is a difficulty, by saying, you were talking about how you wanted to be around people that were competitive and pushing you and, challenging you. To be able to be a part of, help us fix this is massive.
Oh,
in terms
absolutely.
of engagement.
No, and even if it's for, bad things, that sense of, hey, we're all in this together. We're going to fix it together.
Yeah.
It just builds a esprit de corps and the camaraderie. And then when you're on the other side of it, what we see now, and like I said, I've had 3 financially kind of distressed hospitals that we went and fixed up. The amount of pride, knowing that, hey, we took this the plane was kind of going down a little bit, and we not only kind of pulled it and stabilized it, but we got it going this way. It's unbelievable because, again, you go back to transparency. If they didn't know how bad things were at the beginning, they couldn't experience the joy that we have now with it being so good. If I was never an open book to the financials and say, hey, this is going to be tough, but we can do it. I wouldn't be here. Like, I wouldn't take a job that I thought I was going to fail at. But now the pride and the joy, and they want to tell their story to other hospitals. If they wouldn't have been at the bottom, they wouldn't have appreciated the top as much.
Can I ask you a very tactical question? Yes. Because given your background, you are someone who would understand the financials better than typically someone in a healthcare field, just because it's not part of their training and education. So when you talk about opening the books, and how did you communicate that in such a way that someone maybe with a non-business background would understand
That's an incredible question. So here's what we had to do. We had people, when we started opening up the leaderships, and I've heard your other leaders on here, and it's so true. It's every industry that, one of our lab employees that have been there for 30 years, guess what? We make you manager and a leader in the lab because you've been there the longest. What we forget, though, is that the way every business is going, we're having Sally or Jim in the lab more accountable to their budget, to their employee counts, their expenses. And they don't realize that Sally or Jim may not have had any financial background training at all. They only know their personal budget at home, and some of them don't even have a personal budget at home. So you're absolutely right. Before you have somebody run, you've got to, and again, this goes back to that, you got to pause for a second. Now, I felt the urgency when the financials weren't good, but in order to have the 400 or 500 people helping you out, I had to pause again, and that's hard for me to pause, but you have to pause again, and you have to start from square one with their financial education. And we had our CFO sit down almost one-on-one with many of our leaders and say, okay, this is revenue, this is expense. And every time you sign a contract with an outside company, they send us a bill every month for $5,000, and we've got to pay that, and that's in your department. And they're like, wait, I just thought it was a bill to the hospital. I didn't know that, and it's nothing against them.
They never had it explained to them.
They never had it explained, and they're wonderful people because you're right. They take ownership now. They attack those problems within their department almost like it's personal. Like this is their goal. Their goal is to provide a great product, but to keep the expenses down. And so it went back to education because you're right. I think that we're missing the boat if we don't pause for a second and make sure we're all level set and on the same page and can understand some of the terminology and the lingo that we're using about revenues and expenses and bottom lines, and that doesn't mean the same to everybody. So we really had to do education. So we did leadership meetings, and in the first few minutes of those, we really just had some like financial education 101.
Oh, that's great.
So, and then we presented the financials, and then we talked through them, and we, me and the CFO would kick it back and forth and make sure that if I said something that was more kind of lingo, I says, everybody understand what that means and what we mean by FTE? And they're like, no, what does that mean? And they were very honest, and you say, okay, that's full-time equivalent, and you really walk them through it. But it also is very eye-opening that these are some of our leaders in the hospital, and they're very, very good at their department, at respiratory therapy, at x-ray, but they don't know the financial part of it. So we can't push that on them to own it until they understand it.
And can't assume that they know it either, because that's just not a part of the training. Well, something else, speaking of part of the training, from my perspective, I can't imagine that through your medical training, there was a lot around how to be a leader, and you got the business part, which was great, but how did you learn how to lead people? How did you kind of craft your own leadership style?
So I think like many of the other guests on here, it all goes back to, I think one of the, either you're drawn to it because it's internal in the medical field, or you become that by going into the medical field. It's just this lifelong passion for learning. And I know that a lot of great leaders that I've interacted with are constantly learning and reading and watching podcasts and reading leadership books, and it is, it's refreshing for me to be in a field where it was very easy because I'm surrounded by people that are constantly wanting to learn.
Yeah.
So what would happen is, instead of reading 10 of the most recent journal articles on, pneumonia, I would read 5 of them, but then you'd also read leadership.
Wow.
So it was just about constantly reading on leadership. And I think there's a little bit of that inside of us that draws us to want to be leaders. But that doesn't mean that somebody that hasn't had that their whole life, I don't think they can definitely become leaders.
Right.
I mean, we're all leaders, whether we know it or not is a different story.
Or whether we're actually demonstrating it or not, but
Correct.
we are, you're right.
No, absolutely. And so, for me, it was that yearning, and then you just start, just like in medical school, you just take everything in about leadership that you can. So you read, and you listen to the popular leader gurus, and you make sure that you're constantly making yourself better every day, and waking up and saying, my goal for today is to be a better version of myself than yesterday. And sometimes that's reading some medical, literature, because I'm still practicing as a physician. But most of the time, it's about leadership, quite honestly. And you try to stay up to date on what other healthcare leaders are doing, but just general leadership folks and what they're focusing on now.
That's amazing, though, because I think what a decision that you made to carve out some of that time, instead of, like you said, reading the 10 journals or articles, maybe saying, hey, I'm not going to completely, again, abandon that piece of it, but I need to make time and space for this as well.
And you do have to be intentional with it.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, it's hard because, again, you get excited about something and then you want to jump all into it, and you think, okay, now I've got to pause. I've got to make sure. And really, during COVID, it taught me to be very intentional too. So, during COVID, that was top of mind for everybody, because literally, as a leader, you're trying to get through that day.
Yeah.
And but you also had to be strategic in your business. So, it was one of those things that when you have a big crisis that pops up in your organization or on your team, I had to be very intentional that 75% of my day I dedicated to handling COVID and COVID issues, and what were we going to do about visitation, and how much staffing did we have. But I always carved out 25% of my time to still work on the strategy for the organization.
Wow.
So, and literally within my calendar, carved out 25% of my time to make sure that I still met with community physicians that wanted to join our organization, or opportunities to grow, expand. So it is when you love doing everything. I am self-aware enough to know that I have to guard a little bit of that, because I have to carve out the important things. And literally, I've got great admins that help me do this. It's that carve out some of that time to make sure that I don't get so laser beam focused in COVID that all my meetings all day long are about COVID. It's, hey, give me my last 4 meetings of the day and block it off for strategy.
Well, and I think that's one of the hardest parts about being a leader, is trying to figure out how to do the strategic and the tactical day-to-day stuff. And I could see where, again, given your role, given what was going on with COVID, how easy it would be for you to just go into full firefighter mode every day and just be tactical.
It is. And again, you've been in businesses. I know you have a terrific background as well that I'm very envious of. I almost was heading to a former company of yours with my chemistry background. That was one of my backup plans. So, I think it's easy for us to go into a reactionary mode, right? So I love to have an open door policy, because I never want people to think that I'm not approachable. And with that, though, a lot of times they come in and they're like, and they drop it on your plate, and you got to fix it right then. And then what happens is you're right. So then that meeting runs over and you're in the next meeting thinking about the last thing that somebody dropped onto your plate. And then what would happen is at the end of the day, and with COVID, I felt like I was getting punched in the head from all different directions. So we were at the end of the day and all of a sudden I'm like, oh my goodness, I really wanted to go meet this key new physician in the area to see if there's an opportunity to partner on something, and I didn't get to. So, I think being very intentional about your schedule is important. And, just even your daily schedule as far as, trying to work in exercise or meditation or whatever it is to keep your, self mentally healthy. But for me, the business part of the day, and I like your show because it seems very practical, and I do want to give some practical pointers. Maybe it helps somebody, maybe it doesn't.
No, you're giving them, and I'm going to keep asking you to give them.
For me, it was literally, putting in my calendar and my schedule during the day. It was, intentionally blocking off things to make sure that, I had enough time to think about it, and I couldn't bleed anything that was very reactionary and very, I need to get this done today, and not let it bleed into the strategic part.
Yeah, and it sounds like you probably had to have some pretty clear boundaries too.
Yeah, very clear.
First of all, great suggestion on actually calendaring things, because I think that's a lot of times people don't do that, and that's a great first step. But then some people have it on their calendar and that's just time for me to think about the future, and I can't do that today. I'll go do this other thing. So I would assume you had to set some pretty clear boundaries for yourself, and probably admins as well.
I did. That. So the motto was, if it was life or death, obviously it could come into there, or if the building was burning down, or I say that in jest, but that set the tone for this has to be extremely, extremely important to bump into our strategic part of the day, where we constantly need to be, because we knew there was going to be life after COVID. Yeah. And we knew for any business that struggled through COVID, there was going to be life at the end of this. I know some businesses really, really struggled with COVID. But for us, it was staffing, it was morale, and you had to spend a lot of your time on that to make sure you were picking everybody up. And I know you and I had a side conversation that, most of the time during the day, I feel like I'm the chief operating cheerleader. Yeah, where you're going around and you're picking up morale and you're letting everybody know that you appreciate what they're doing. And that was very important to do that through COVID, but I also knew that there was going to be life after COVID. Yeah. And in any business, in any leadership role you're in, whether, no matter what that immediate problem is, there's going to be a time after that problem that you're going to have to deal with. And if you just go into this, bury your head in the sand mode, you're not going to have anything on the other side to deal with and work with. So
true. You're not going to have a business anymore to run, so you won't have to worry about it.
Absolutely. Or customers or patients or whatever it is. So, it's hard. Because, you want to be that leader that's responsive. You want to be that leader that helps people, and they say, I can go to this person for that. But, but if you don't block off some of that time to be strategic, you're not going to be a good leader long term.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so true. Thank you for joining this episode of Leadership Rediscovered with Dr. David Hess, the newly appointed President and CEO of WVU Medicine United Hospital Center. There is just too much to put into one episode here, so please be sure to subscribe and tune in next week for the rest of the conversation.